We welcome everyone to our next semester of Coptic Grammar. We have, as always, with us Dr. Joseph Sidrak, and I think we're going to start off with some review and then continue on with relative pronouns. So without further ado, you can go ahead and start us off with a prayer.
Okay. Welcome back, everybody, and let's pray together. In the name of the Father, and Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Through Christ Jesus our Lord. For thine is the kingdom and the power, and glory forever and ever. Amen. In the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody who's continuing on from last year. I'm glad to have everybody back, and hopefully most of you, everybody did really well on the final exams. I know it took a long time to grade, but we're having a lot of technical issues on figuring out how to get in there and actually put in grades and just kind of some interesting things. But we finally figured it out, and I tried to make some comments on it. So if you have any questions about some of the comments, especially mostly with sentences like 4 through 10, when I was working on the first one, first couple of sentences, I was not really able to put a whole lot of comments. But anyway, most people did really well anyway, so there was not a whole lot to talk about. So good job, everybody. And I think in the future, when we start having more upcoming homework assignments, I was thinking about we're thinking about other ways of making it a little bit more a simpler system, I guess. So once we get that hammered out, we'll go over those things. But anyway, so we're going to be starting the new year, and we're going to be continuing through our textbook, again, the book by Coptic Grammar by Maud Dawood. And I think what I'd like to do is, the end of last semester, we started going to some things, and we kind of went through it fast just to kind of finish that lesson. So I'm just going to kind of review it briefly before we go into today's lesson. But just as usual, if anyone has any questions about anything from today back to the beginning of last year, feel free to chime in at any point, and I'll do my best to try to answer the question. Or if I can't right off the bat, I'll do my best to research it. So just to start where we left off last time, we were reviewing the different prepositions with the object pronouns, which we tend to run across quite a bit. I'm not going to go through each and every single conjugation, but I just kind of want to focus on the general groups. So the prepositions that we went over, the simplest one is chen. Chen means in. And when you have these object pronouns, what that means is, pronoun is something that takes the place of the noun being like a person, place, or thing. So the pronoun, like in this, click on something here. So the pronoun here would be me instead of Joseph. Joseph would be like a proper name, so that would be a noun, so pronoun would be me. So if I'm saying like Jesus is, or the Holy Spirit is inside me, I would say P ipnivma, F-O-ab, and chit, meaning is in me. So the preposition is in, but it's a conjugation based on the word chen, but it has this suffix, which is the object pronoun, which specifies who is the object of the preposition. So the object of the preposition in this case is me. So that's why we call it the object pronoun. And it's a pronoun because it's like me, you, he, she, him, her, it. It's something that takes the place of the actual proper noun or person, or proper name or person, place, or thing. So that's what that means. So for chen, we conjugate it as en, chi, and then en chit, and then we just basically change the last letter here to fit with our famous six box pattern that I remember the very first day I told you guys that we're going to keep going back and forth or over us over and over and over again about the six box table, that once you just get that pattern down, almost everything falls into that pattern. So in this case, the object pronoun for first person singular, it's a tav. So you would add that tav here where my cursor is. I don't know, hopefully you can see that. But because it's duplicated, it's assimilated into it, so you really don't have to write it once. In the Coptic, in the Psalmodea with the doxologies, especially, I think it's for Great Lent, you'll see an example of this not being assimilated in the Sunday doxology, where it says like arit emefriti and ti porni, for example. And it says, let me get to the end here. Let's see. Let's shrink this down a little bit. It says read mfvt and for example. So the same way, like this is, and this is the other one is enchit with a t. You know, in the doxology, they spell it out. They add on this extra t, but it's not necessarily required. It can be, basically combined into one. So you're not going to be like aritit or something like that. It's just going to be arit. And the same thing goes with what we were just talking about. Instead of enchit, you can imagine like it's there in parentheses, but it's really not there because it's the same letter, so they don't really double it. But for whatever reason in the doxology book, for the Sunday doxology or the weekend doxologies, for like Great Lent is probably the example that comes to mind. You'll see that doubled. So, so enchit. So we're basically going to change the last letter. Enchitek, enchitk, enchiti, enchit. So basically it's the same prefix part. We're only changing the object pronoun, and that tells you who you're talking about. So in him. And again, because there is no such thing as it in Coptic, depending on the situation, it's going to be either third person singular, masculine, or feminine is going to be the equivalent of it. Like, for example, if like just like in Arabic, like there's no it, like the car broke down, you'd say like al-Arabiyya bazat or hiya bazat. Hiya means like her or she got messed up, so there's no it. So same thing in Coptic. Enchit and chitin. Remember the second person plural. In some instances, it's gonna have thino as the object pronoun with an unconjugated preposition. Same thing like here, evol chen thino. So that's just something that we're going to have to memorize, because there's certain situations you're going to see that a lot. And the most famous example, especially if you remember from Tazbih, is 10 tino. 10 tino ibshoy nishirin tepioin. Tentino. Tentino means you, plural, because this is the object pronoun, you, plural. 10 comes from, we say, de Christos afton, or afton, afsotimon ton, in 10, that's where that comes from. To rise, so that means arise, you, plural. So you say, arise, O children of the light. Just FYI, in some old manuscripts, we do tend to see the imperative of tentino. Tentino is an imperative, but we do tend to see it in this other form, to uno, in some manuscripts. And it's not even really manuscripts. There's a very famous Psalmodea written or compiled by the Kiahka Psalmodea. Many of you may have it in your homes or your churches, actually. by a famous Coptic scholar in the early 1900s in Egypt. His name was Claudius Labib, and he actually, in his Ipsilamadea, it doesn't say Tempino, it says Ta'unu Ibshoy. So anyway, it's not really just an old manuscript. It's actually, it's a different way, and it probably is actually more proper to say Ta'unu instead of Tempino. But anyway, what we have now is Tempino. So let's go back here. So and then in Khantino and Khito, and then basically Evol Khan. E means like to, or pointing towards a direction, and vol means to out. So that's why we say from, like to away or to out. So from in, so we say evol khen, like when we do the readings for Pascha, evol khen Isaias fi prophetis, that means from in Isaiah the prophet, or not literally in Isaiah, but in the book of Isaiah. From in the book of Isaiah the prophet, may his blessing be with us all. I mean, evol khen Isaias fi prophetis. So we're taking something from out, from inside of it to out, so that's what we say from. So evol and chit, and again the same exact conjugations, you just add evol. And I try to point out the etymology of the words, or the breakdown of the words, because that's really how you get to figure out what it truly means. So this means to out or to away, to away from in, you feminine, for example here. Okay, and then the same conjugations. We talked about he gen versus e-gen. Gen comes from an ancient word meaning like the head, like a person's head. It's from from ancient Egyptian. In Coptic, head is usually used as afe, like in the example of the hymn of Timitis Noti. We say the 12 virtues upon the head of the Pope, like Ejen et afe, in Pignotum Macarius, and it goes on. So, but in ancient Egyptian, like pre-Coptic, head, a person's head had this derived from the ancient Egyptian way of saying head. So we're talking about he gen, upon the head, or to or towards the head. So it tells us the difference between something that's static, or something that's just like resting upon the top of something, versus something that's actively like falling upon or coming upon something. So for example, something like this would be the book is sitting on the table. You'd say pigom, hijen, tia trapeza, hijen. But if you're going to say like I fell on the floor, something like an active thing that's happening, you can say I hey ejen pikahi. I fell on the floor. So that's the difference between hijen and ejen. And then we've got the conjugation pattern here again. I won't go into it too much because part of it is just kind of getting used to these patterns, but you can see how the fi and the sima and the ne and higentino or ejentino, it's kind of, the table's a little bit mixed up here, but this corresponds to this. So they all follow the same pattern. Hiten, we all know hiten from hiten nefadizbeya. Ten comes from the ancient Egyptian word meaning hand, like somebody's hands. So he, remember, it's upon or on, so upon the hands. So, and you have evol, so it means to, outside, or to away from upon the hands of whatever the object pronoun is. So it means away from the hands of, or by the hands of. So that's why we say it's by the means of, or we just kind of summarize it in English as through. So like he ten nefadizbeya would be like upon the hands, or by the, of course intercessions don't have hands, but it's just, think of it in that sense, upon the hands of the intercessions of St. Mary. So by the hands of the intercessions of St. Mary, or through the intercessions of St. Mary. So we say pizza neperezveje. So that's where that comes from. And then adding the prefix evol, it actually has a very similar meaning. So again, without belaboring the point too much, and then the same conjugation pattern. Ha means to or towards. The second part here actually relates to the mouth, ro. So you'd say roi means like my mouth. So ha roi means to my mouth or towards me. So you could say af I haroi, or he came to me. But literally, when you go back to it etymologically, if I can get that word out, it means to or towards my mouth, to or towards your mouth, masculine, to or towards your mouth, feminine, etc. So whenever you see haroi, that's what ha roi means. It's composed of those two parts. So evol haroi is the opposite. Evol haroi means away from me, because it means to away or to the outside, because vol means away or outside. So to away from my mouth, basically, is the way you think of it. So mashenak evol haroi. Remember, mashenak means you, masculine, imperative, go away from me. Mashenak evol haroi. So that's the difference between haroi and evol haroi. And then, again, the same conjugation patterns. If means for or because. So evit, J Afsaji eviti, for example, in the hymn for St. Mary's Fast, or actually in the Sunday Theotike as well. J Afsaji eviti. And han ehvi owi eftayot. So they spoke of you. Eviti means for you or about you or concerning you or because of you. And again, the VT would be the second person feminine singular. And again, it just follows the same exact conjugation pattern that we talked about from Khan and Khit and Khiti, etc. Same exact thing. Ethvetino is the second person plural. Uve means against. So, for example, ti ove is an idiom. I can't remember if we talked much about idioms last year, but idioms are words that literally, like, I think the best way to explain it is it literally means something, but figuratively has a totally different meaning. So, for example, ti ove, it's a compound from ti, the word to give, and uve, against. But when you think about what does ti ove means, it doesn't mean anything. I'm going to give against, ti ove pirom. I'm going to give against the man. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. But give against, it has the idiomatic meaning of to argue or fight or quarrel. So if you say ti ove pirome, that means to argue or fight or quarrel with the man. So we actually come across ti ove as an idiom quite a bit. And the best way to think of it is like in Arabic, we use that. You say like an hadilo. It doesn't mean like I'm going to give him something. That means I'm gonna give him something. Is what it means. So it means more I'm going to argue or fight. So it's the same thing. That's a good example of an idiom. So I'm going to give against the man. That means so we're going to be talking about a lot of idioms because there's a lot of idiomatic meanings in Coptic, and this is one of them. So uve means against, and it's conjugated again in its pattern. So the same suffix patterns as the direct object prepositions. Remember from the previous lesson, ni, like of course ni, na, ne. I guess these ones are a little different, not, nos, non, etc. But it's the same subject or same object pronoun. But again, they follow these conjugation patterns that we'd have to get used to and learn. And remember that second person plural ubeki. Insa is means it literally means like next to is probably the best way. Like like moshi in soy. It's a little different than towards me. I mean, he puts in his textbook it's more like towards me, but sa means like at the side of something or next to something. So in soy, so it means like at the side of me or next to me. Or probably the best thing is think of it as more like behind me. Like mushi and soy means like to walk behind me or to follow me. And so, and we'll see examples. And once you actually see examples of real usages of these, then it makes a lot more sense. So this is, again, this is conjugated here instead of in Satino. You can actually come across it in Satino, and you'll see in Sotin also. So there's some of these will have the conjugation, and some of them will have not conjugated, and they'll just be in Satino format, but some of them can be used in both ways. So you'll see both. Ho means also, like from POA we say Intho hoi Maria, Intho hoi, so it means you also marry. But it doesn't only mean also. It's also just a kind of to emphasize the Intho. So instead of saying like you also marry carried in your room. The rest of the words I can't remember Jesus basically, but it says you also. It doesn't really mean you also married because nobody else carried Jesus in the room. But it's more of like into hoy Maria. It's like you marry. Just think of it like as like more of like a like only you marry basically. It doesn't really mean only, but it's just saying like it's just pointing out the you. So only you carried Jesus in your womb. So that's another way of the interpretation of it. So it's not just also, but it also can be used in other senses like that. In general, like they have here, they are always they're always combined with the pronoun, just the regular old pronouns we took from one of the first couple of lessons. So you wouldn't just say ho something, you say anoko, intoko, intohoi, intoko. So you'll never see ho without something, or this thing without something. And in this tense, this conjugation, or this person corresponds to this person. So you're not going to see like enthos hoten. No, it's always going to be enthos hos 100% of the time. It's going to be anon hon, like anon hon tentov. It's going to be anon hon. It's not going to be anon hoi, for example. So that was one of the big mistakes that I took off a lot of points for on the final exam, because we talked about that point a lot. For example, especially with like ikna shinach or ifna shinach, I still had people on the final exam putting like tina shinach or something, for example, which that's wrong. It has to correspond. So same thing in this one. Immavat. This is a little bit trickier to see where the root comes, but basically it comes from this part. I'll write it out here. So immavat. It actually comes from the root of it is uwai. Uwai, remember the number one. So uwai is actually where this comes from. Owa. But it's kind of in the ancient form. So we can see this root here. So because this means one, and the root of this is one, this means alone or by myself or whatever. So like I was standing by myself, you would say I ohi immavat, or you are standing by yourself. Nak ohi immavat, etc. So you're standing alone. Or like I alone did this. Anok immavat I iri imfai. I did this by myself. I did this alone. So that's why you can see the root. Owa comes from uwai, meaning one. So that's why it's alone, or any. You're going to use whatever form makes sense in English, but that's what the meaning of it is. And same thing, immavat thino is the second person plural. And I think that was the end of those ones we took. So if you have any questions about those, please feel free to send them in. And then I'm going to switch here to today's lesson. Let's see. Okay, so today we're starting the new semester now that we're done with review. So we're going to talk about relative pronouns. So the relative pronouns are very common in Coptic. So pronouns, remember again, we talked about pronouns are anything that takes the place of a noun. So what's relative? Relative means it talks about how something is relating to something else, or something that's in a spatial relationship with something, like something that's associated with something, so it relates to something. So, like for example, in English you would say like he. So like he who walked down, spelling English even now, down the street. So the who is essentially kind of the relative part. He is the pronoun. He who, and this relates to walking down the street. So that's what it means. It actually makes a lot more sense in Coptic. So we're going to do some more examples. So the relative pronouns are actually pretty easy. There's only 3 of them, and they all have this relative. So et is kind of the main feature. So he put in his textbook, this may substitute for any of the above. It doesn't really substitute, but again, you'll see that when we start to see some examples. But the best way to think of it as phi, okay, you've got the masculine, feminine, and plural, just like everything else, like pi tai nai, phi thai nai. Here we've got phi, ni, fiat, niet. Okay, so phi, we had remember we had the nearer demonstratives. Remember, just to kind of explain it to make it clear here, we had the nearer demonstratives. Hopefully, remember that from before. The nearer demonstratives means phi, and na. So that means like this, right? Remember, phi, and means like phi, phi itov n. If like the hymn phi itov n for the for the Feast of the Cross, as well as for Besta, we say phi it of n joy. I think it goes in Othi sheep. Okay, he who. So basically, it means this. So we're talking specifically because it's the nearer demonstrative. We're saying this, like this person. We're talking about Jesus, this person, as opposed to that person. So that's what. So we say. I think the translation says he who offered himself as an acceptable sacrifice, but really we're not saying he. We're saying phi, this one, like this person or this one, the relative, it, what we just talked about, who, off n, brought himself upwards, remember? To upwards. So this, who brought himself to upwards, basically who offered himself. So that's what we're saying. So that's the near demonstrative. Well, if you have a near, it's just like if you have something near, you're going to have something for a further demonstrative. And that's what the opposite of this is that. So the same thing in Coptic, the opposite of phi is phi, the further demonstrative. So if we're going to say like phi is of n, then we're going to say it's not this who brought himself up, or like this one, or in this case, we're talking about Jesus, we're going to say this Jesus that brought himself up. We're going to say that Jesus, that one over there, the further demonstrative. So phi et. So that one over there, who. So that's what the et means, is like who. That's the relative. So you have this pronoun with this relative. So that's what we call it, the relative pronouns. I'm sorry, I put and, but it should be and, okay? So that who brought himself up. So that person over there that brought himself up, as opposed to this person over here that brought himself up as an acceptable sacrifice. So that's the difference. So the near demonstratives are phi, phi, 9. And then the further demonstratives are what we took on the other page here. I'll just flip back instead of typing it again. Phi, phi, ni. And we see these quite a bit. One of the best examples is in the liturgy. Let's just go, for example, we say it's Phi et Shop. Phi et Shop. Need choice. Get the abbreviation there. So Phi et Shop. I don't have to put there. It should have lines on top of it. Okay. So Phi et Shop. Which is focused on the Phi et Shop part. We have it translated as I think it says the being, or you the being. But we want to break it down. So what does that mean, the being? Is it like a being? It's not like a being, like a like some sort of entity, a being. No, it's like it's the one who bees, or the one who is. So really, probably the best way to translate it is phi, meaning it's masculine. So something that's masculine, that's further away. So we're kind of pointing at something. We're not saying this who is. We're saying you. But it doesn't necessarily mean just you. It could be he, because we're talking about a masculine. It just depends on the context of the situation. So you can say you, in capital, because we're talking about Christ. So you, who. Shop, what does shop mean? It has several meanings. Shop means to buy or purchase something, but shop means also to exist or dwell, or basically live, be in existence. So you who exist, it shop. So basically, it's kind of like, it's almost like saying, like when God said I am, but now we're saying you are. So this is probably more precise instead of oh you the being. It means like oh you who exist, or you who are in existence, or you who are. So it's kind of like a response to I am, and then we're saying yeah you who are, or you who exist. So think of it that way instead of the being. So we've got the further demonstrative. So we're not saying like you over, like this who exists. We're saying you, or that, or you over there who exists, or you who are. Another example. Let's see. I'm trying to think of some better examples, but I just drew a blank. I had several examples I was thinking of earlier today. But Let's just flip back over here and see if we can find them. Okay. Well, let me just go through the rest of these, and then when we do the readings, we'll come across and we'll come across some more examples. Okay. So thiet, same exact thing, but it's the feminine, and then miet against the plural. Things I think we talked about. Ente. Ente means of, and then p. Remember, it's the singular masculine definite article. The o means the glory. Okay. Okay. So here's some good examples from. I'm gonna use these examples instead of doing a homework assignment this time, since it's just our first lesson back for the second semester. So let's just break this apart on the next page here, so we can get the real meaning here. So في خمسة بيترونس بكف O, okay? في خمسة في بيترونس بكف O. Okay. So how are we going to break this up in, for our final exam, for example? Phi, again, it's the further demonstrative, so it's talking about you or he or etc. who is over there. So you, further away. And if I recall correctly, we know from the context in the liturgy that it's because of this is from the St. Basil liturgy, and we know from the context of the liturgy that several of the verb tenses before this are talking about the third person singular masculine. So we know it's talking about he. But in Coptic, there's really no distinction. But when we translate it in English, we know it's going to be he instead of you, because of its context and the preceding sentences that go right before this in the liturgy of St. Basil. So we know we're actually saying he. So instead of saying you over there, we're going to say he over there. So he, the first, that's how we know it's going to be he in this sentence. He, who, this is the relative part. Hemsi is the verb to sit, right? Hemsi. So he who sits. Remember we just talked about he gen. Is he gen an active or passive? It's passive, right? Because hemsi, you're just sit on something. You don't like actively or not like actively sitting like up and down or something. It's just you who sits. That's why we use he gen instead of I gen. So you or he who sits upon. That's what it means. It means on the on the head of basically like on the top, because the head is the top thing. So that's why we say upon. So he who sits upon, P, Thronos, the Greek word for throne, so it's very easy. He who sits upon the throne. And we just learned the word ente means of, throne, of. If his, it is the possessive adjective, the third person singular masculine possessive adjective, his glory. He who sits upon the throne of his glory. And that's how also we know that, because his, again, remember we're talking about it means the third person masculine singular. That's also another reason why I know this is he as opposed to you, because it wouldn't be you who sits upon the throne of his glory, because then they don't correspond. So that's another way that we know that in English, even though this doesn't have a you or he in Coptic, when we're translating in English, we know that it's better to use the word he, because we're saying he who sits upon the throne of his glory. And then it goes on to say, let me just type the rest up here. It's, if I remember correctly, it's phi etu osh emof I think it's C10. bom, niven, fu, web. And somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. So I can't remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what it says. He uses the throne the Lord who is worshipped by all the holy powers. We have to worship him. Iten bom niven et oab. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's that. Okay. So let's break apart this part because it has a lot of the relatives in there again that we just talked about. So again, we know it's still in the same context. We're not going to switch suddenly, from he to you. So it's going to be he. So he, who, and why does this look like it has a double uu? I can't remember. I think even in the liturgy book there may be a typo where this is merged together. I know I've seen that in a couple places, but there's actually supposed to be there. So let's break it apart here. So the further demonstrative, he, who. Remember we talked about the suffix, all these different suffixes, especially like I'm gonna go back to the lesson that we were just talking about because it gives good examples of it. So here, let's see, where did it go? Chapter 11 2. Okay, so what's the u suffix? It's the third person plural, right? Third person plural. Third person plural. Third person plural. So we know from the suffix attached to the relative, it would have been nice if they would have had these conjugations. So we know that this is going to be the third person plural. He, who, they, because that's the third person plural, and then uosht means to worship. So he, who, they worship. Who do they worship? Immuf, remember the direct objects that we talked about. The direct object means that's what receives this function of the verb directly. So that's what we call the direct object. He, who they worship him, again, because we're talking about Jesus or God. I can't remember the exact context, but so we're going to capitalize it. He, who they worship him. He ten. Remember we talked about he ten. Upon the hands, or that's what we say by or through. He, who they worship him through or by. Boom. Boom means power. Power. Even. It's just a word you have to memorize. It means all or every. By power, every. And then we have the relative again. F. So the relative, if it's preceding a bil manur group word, remember like we talked about, the beta, lambda, may, nay, o, or rho, the t is going to turn into theta. That's just by default, and it has to do with just the I guess the linguistics of it. So it's going to be f-o-web instead of f-o-web. Okay, so by power every, which is, I put is, but there's really no is, but which is. A web means pure or holy. So that's why we say we kind of summarize this as who is worshipped by all the holy powers, but you can see literally means he who they worship him through or by every power which is holy. So that's literally what it's, if you're going to translate it literally. So we're just going to summarize it as he who is worshipped by all the holy powers. Okay? So we're seeing a lot of the examples of the relative here. Something that he didn't talk about, I can't remember if he's going to talk about it in some of the future lessons. It's been a little while since I've looked ahead into lessons, but let's see. So go back to Coptic language here. Did I get to the wrong one? Like, for example, in the hymn, like Nefsenti, for example, we say pet chosi. Like pet chosi, or for example, in the hymn Altai Parthenos, we say pet. It actually comes out of the Psalms, so this part, but it's for we use the Psalms in this hymn. Altai Parthenos, pet keni out. Okay, you see the relative here, right? But you don't see the fi, or ni. You see the p. And what this is this is the definite article. So think of it as like p in these instances. And there's also other instances where you'll see that actually means like pe, but it just depends on the context. But I'm just, we'll talk about that later. So we're just going to talk about for now. You'll see fi, ni, or you see pet. So what does that mean? Like pet chosi. Why do we say why do we say it translate pet chosi is the highest? Because it's the definite article. So the who is high. So it's like the one who is high. So it means the one who is the most high. So pet chosi means the most high. Pet keni out means has to do with fat, like literally fat. So we're talking about the who is the fattest, or that's the comes from the Psalms, like the fattest. Oops. Okay. So you'll come across pet. That's the other form of the relative, but this is the definite article. So it's not the further demonstrative, but it's the definite article. Okay. So you can tell the difference of what it means. And then in some instances, I'll just for completeness sake, we'll say in thof. You have to use it in a sentence so you can see the difference. In thof pe et moshi. So remember, I'm going to use the relative with the theta because the may for moshi to walk is the binomial group. So in thof pe moshi instead of the t. So, but here's the relative. But we're going to say, remember when we had these sentences, we'd say like in thof pe he Romi, like he is the man or he is the one, for example. But when we're using the relative, we're linking this with using this verb. So this pe, it's different than the definite article. It's not the definite article. It's actually this pe. So it's like entof pe eth mochi. So it is he who walks. So he is walking. But it's not separated out like this because remember, a lot of things get assimilated in Coptic. So this double E here, these two different E's, they just turn into one E. So it's different. That's why I'm saying you'll see pit, but it means two different things. Depending on the context, it can mean the definite article or it can mean the pit from the bipartite sentences that we talked about, like NFP and PP, etc. So anyway, I think that's most of the stuff we wanted to talk about today. Let's get back here, make sure there's nothing else. No, actually, maybe I talked too much. There's actually quite a bit more left. Sorry. Okay, basically it's just immav is really the only thing we're going to add on here. So immav means over there. Okay. Well, we started late, 10 minutes. I think we still have 10 minutes to go probably, so it should be fine. Immav means over there or there. Okay. So not to be confused with the word mav. Mav means mother or mom, but immav means over there. Okay, so don't confuse the two. And it's going to be very clearly obvious in context. So what we're gonna see here, because we're gonna run across this quite a bit, is you're gonna have the relative pronouns, just like we talked about before, fi et, ni et, or et, but we're gonna have it with imma. So in general, with the relative, if it's two separate words, it's going to have this extra e attached onto it. So instead of fiat mav, you're going to try to link all that together. It's actually fiete and mav. Fiete and mav. It doesn't really mean anything different because it has an extra e. It just has to do with, again, the way that the grammar is in linguistics. So fiete and mav instead of fiat and mav. I mean, it's really hard to say that. It's probably has to do, I think it has mostly just to do with like how it's pronounced. So, and what does it mean? Let's take some examples. So here they have like piromi, fiete, and mav. Okay, so let's break that apart here. Piromi. My font again here. Piromi. Fiete, and mav. Shari, ero. Okay, let's just take that sentence for example. Let's add it on the second part. Piromi, the man. He who, and in parentheses you can include is over there. Okay, so let's just type this down so we can. Okay, so we can see what we're trying to say here. Let's just type underneath it. The man, he who, and then I'm going to put is in parentheses just so we can understand it in English, but there's no is in the Coptic. He who is over there, or there.
Joe, we can't see your screen anymore.
Oh, okay. Did it just cut out now or earlier?
No, probably in the past like minute or so.
Okay, so just right now. Okay, good. Let me just see if I can fix it. Oh, okay. Let me share it back again. Okay, are you seeing it now?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. So hopefully didn't miss too much. So I just basically I typed piromi, fiete, and mav, and then I added on afshari ero just so we can get the meaning of the sentence. So piromi, it's easy. The man. Fiete, he who. There is no is in the Coptic, but to understand in English, I'm just going to include this is in parentheses. So he who is. Mav over there. So he who is over there. Afshari eroi. Remember, that's from, we took that last semester. So past tense, he. Shari means to hit or smite. He hit me. So the man, so in English, you're going to think of it as the man, comma, he who is over there, that guy. So basically, you're saying that guy over there, he's the one, he hit me. Okay? And it's different than, like, let's say if we were going to say, for example, just the relative, but without the pronoun, you know, so it just changes the meaning very subtly, but it's different. So piromi, it's a mav. So then you would change it because it basically would mean like that. That man. Okay, we're going to say the man who is there. He hit me. Okay. Or since we don't have this further demonstrative, but it still is kind of understood as you can just say basically say that man over there. Yeah. So because we don't have this further demonstrative, the further demonstrative, this includes a construct based off of the definite articles. That's why that's why it has that's why it has this he in it, because the Coptic phi is similar in understanding to the p. If that makes any sense, probably doesn't, but but linguistically in old times the phi is related to the p. So this actually contains the definite article p in it, but it's combined with the it's an aspirate. It's basically in ancient times. This is an aspirated form of this. So p romi versus like p romi is like aspirated. It just has to do with it being attached to the eta instead of the iota. So you have to change it to an aspirated sound with the phi. So you know, again, it's just kind of getting really deep into the meaning of it. But this is almost equivalent to the definite article attached to this eta instead of a iota. Okay. So anyway, I think that's probably most of our lesson. We only had a few minutes left, so I'm not going to do any of the readings today. I've pulled up some readings today, but we're pretty much at the end of the lesson. So if there's any kind of final questions or comments or anything, and again, I'm glad to have everybody back. Hopefully, everybody's enjoying the classes and kind of getting back to back in the swing of things again, and had a good summer. But otherwise, I'll just check in with the moderators and see if you have any questions or comments or anything, and we'll probably conclude. Any questions or anything more else?
No, Joe, we don't have any questions.
Okay. All right, well, we'll go ahead and conclude, and let's see if I still have my Our Father topic saved, because this is the advanced class now. So let's see, it should be here somewhere. Okay, here we go. Okay, so let's all pray together. And anytime, just remember, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to contact me. Hopefully the website is set up so I still get the stuff forwarded to me, so I can check in your messages. But I think at one point people were sending me messages and they weren't coming to me all the time. But hopefully that's fixed again. But anyway, let's pray all together. نمبشيري نمبنما أواب ونوتي إن أوت أمين جاب نيوت تخلني في قوي معرف توه ونجاب كران مارس إي إنجا تكمت أورو بيت هناك معرف شوبي إما فريتي خانت فاه نام هي جن في كاهي بن أويك انتراستي ميف نانم فو أو كاني يتيرو نان إيفول excuse me. Riti hon enten ko evol enni ete owunentan erau awon perente nakhona pirasmos ala nahmen evol habivet hou khen be Christos isos ben choice jetok tetimet uru nimtigom nimpi au sha'ene enteni ene tiro amin khenefran mefiot nimshiri nimbetnemat oab unot yinot amin. Okay, thank you everybody, and have a good night.